Our next guest is someone I have known, God, it's at least 10 years, 10 or 11
Yes.
years, something like that. Initially through a coaching organization that I was a part of where he wasn't part of the coach, he actually coached the coaches. So you know you're good when you're coaching coaches. So he coached the coach. He's worked with a number of my clients. His name is Mike Carroll. Mike is founder and managing partner of Intelligent Conversations, and he brings more than 32 years of business to business sales experience to help middle market companies drive remarkable growth. Mike works hands on with senior executives, sales leaders, and salespeople to build profitable sales cultures. He's transformed hundreds of sales teams by changing behaviors and leveraging proven methodologies to increase sales and improve profitability. And the first thing I'm going to do is yell at him because he sent me this bio and forgot something very important that thankfully I didn't forget is
Thank you,
he's
Mike.
also the author.
Oh, there you go.
You got to get this in your bio, man. He's the author of The Sales Team You Deserve. At least I hope he is, because I did have some questions about that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I've got it right here. So yeah, and you're right. I'm always scrambling to get my bio up to date, and it seems every time I edit it, I have to add. It used to be more than 20 years experience, and now it's like more than 28. Now I'm like, oh man, I better add a few. So yeah,
Billions of years experience. Well, hey,
yeah, that's right.
welcome to the show.
Thank you,
I
Mike.
didn't want the first thing I did was to yell at you, but I have to yell
Fair
at you
enough.
for not having the bio. But hey, welcome to the show. And I want to start off with just something that's timely, and then we'll get into the book and get into a number of other things. But
Sure.
how has sales changed kind of post COVID over the last 3 years or so? How have things changed? And I ask that first because that may be some important context, or maybe not. You may say, Mike, sales is the same damn thing it's always been. But in your mind, how has it changed or has it not changed over the last few years?
I think we've gotten, whether it's sales or other parts of the organization, I think we've gotten a lot more comfortable selling remotely, having Zoom conversations or Teams conversations instead of face to face. I think the folks who really struggled with COVID, sales teams that really struggled are I call them the guys, right? The guys who drive a pickup truck and maybe they're an electronics distributor and they do their milk run and they kind of go from one job site to the next and they pull up blueprints and say, what parts do you need today? Let's go get some chicken wings. Those guys really kind of struggled making the transition to more of a technology sale. But for the most part, I think you're right. Sales is sales. What's changed is the way we communicate. It's a lot harder to get a hold of people on the phone, right? Think about it. People are working remotely. So there's really no switchboard. There's no gatekeeper. A lot of people were only available on their cell phone, and that's not always readily available. So if you didn't have existing relations with your client, if you're trying to acquire new clients, it got a lot tougher to get a hold of people. It's forced people to be more creative with social media, with connecting through content, thought leadership, with email marketing, with text marketing, those types of things. So I think prospecting has changed a little bit, but I think in general, it's like we've seen everywhere else, it's getting used to remote conversations. But at the end of the day, sales is sales. We're now back out in the field. We're able to get together face to face. But I think even with that, I don't know that we're doing as many face to face meetings post COVID as we were pre COVID. I think there are conversations we're comfortable now having remotely, and we don't feel like we need to just take a trip to close the deal when we can close it over Zoom.
Got it. Yeah. So to some degree, is sales, but it has changed. And in some ways, it's gotten more challenging to build those relationships. And to that end, what I really want to focus on in our conversation, since we're talking to CEOs and leadership
Yes.
teams that are trying to build a better leadership team, is I want to focus on number one, how to find salespeople. And we're going to talk a lot about that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
number two, I want to talk also a lot about sales leadership. But
Sure.
let's start with how to find salespeople, and not just find salespeople, but find really good salespeople. Why is it so hard to
Yeah.
find good salespeople?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but I mean, the most obvious is salespeople can sell. And so a mediocre salesperson can run circles around your best HR person. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with CEOs who will say, Mike, the only thing that person sold was getting me to pay an extra 10K or 20K in base salary. After that, they didn't close another deal. And it's very frustrating as an owner because you feel like, okay, I know I need to invest. I know I need to improve the quality of the salespeople I have on board. And you feel like you're flying blind. Now, what can companies do about it? Well, number one, HR and the talent acquisition team and sales leadership need to get aligned. I see a lot of finger pointing. I see a lot of sales managers who walk into interviews unprepared. They kind of wing it. They shoot from the hip. They're unaware of their unconscious biases. You see a sales team and it looks like the Duke University lacrosse team. There's a problem, right? Maybe we're hiring based on a certain profile, right? So we need to get increased awareness and alignment between HR and talent and the sales leadership team. Sales leaders need to commit to giving HR detailed feedback. So it's not enough to say, oh, I didn't like that person. I just didn't feel it. You have to be very focused and specific and, really do a good job of defining this is what I'm looking for. This is what I need. And then HR has to go do their part of finding those people. Now we have a whole system. I don't know how much detail you want to go into. Basically, it starts with getting clarity around what are we looking for in a salesperson, right? Most people have a job scorecard or they'll have a job description. I want to get into the actual sales process and think about the selling environment that person needs to thrive in. Who are they calling on? What level in the organization are they calling really high C-suite or are they calling more mid-level managers and below, right? That's a big difference. What are they selling? Is it a product you can touch and feel? Is it a conceptual service like engineering or consulting? Is it an established product category? Or is it a brand new, no one's ever heard of it, and you've got to almost be an evangelical salesperson, right? So thinking carefully around the types of resistance points a salesperson is going to encounter. Who are they calling on? How big a ticket is it? What's the typical sales cycle? How much resistance are they going to face? A lot of times, sales leaders can't even tell you what that is. And then they're frustrated when the talent team is not presenting great candidates. So, number one, get really crystal clear on what we're looking for.
Let
Yep.
me ask a question there,
Sure.
Mike, before you move on to number 2 is there is, in a lot of positions, but I find this more often in sales, this push and pull between all those things you mentioned. Are they selling big ticket items? And, is it a executive level sale or, what all those things is push and pull between, hey, that's what our sales looks like. So we need someone who's got 15 years experience selling products like ours in environments like ours. Or the other side of it is we need a, good go-getter person who's not afraid of rejection, who's got the right kind of sales attitude, and we'll teach them everything else. And of course, there's a whole lot of gray area in the middle, but
Sure.
talk a
Sure.
little bit about the push and pull between the experience and the attitude. We're going to train someone versus we got to hire someone who already knows it.
I think it's a common mistake that we see CEOs make is, and even sales leaders, where they think I have to have someone with industry experience. They have to know our product. They have to have expertise in telecom or software or whatever. There are advantages to that. So there's a reason why they have that bias. But in my experience, if I get an A player, really strong salesperson, doesn't matter what they're selling. We can teach them domain. You've got a whole building full of domain experts. What you don't have is a building full of people who can call at the right level, ask the thought provoking questions that make the prospect stop in their tracks and go, I hadn't thought of it that way. Tell me more, right? When it's time to bring in the engineering experts or the programming experts or the subject matter expert from the domain experts, you've got a building full of them. What you don't have typically is are people who can start those conversations. So I would, 99% of the time, there are exceptions, right? But 99% of the time, I would say, give me an A player salesperson who's sold in a similar environment. So same level of resistance, same level of competition, relatively similar sales cycle and ticket size and all that good stuff. If they've had success in that in the past, even if it's in a different domain, they're going to be able to transfer those hard to catch skills and learn the domain over time. But in the meantime, you've got to support them with a group of experts who can shore them up.
Got
Um,
it.
I
So,
do
so
have,
yeah,
sorry, just one more thought. I do have examples of clients who really have this, I want to get them right out of college mindset. I want to take them. I like typically, I'm thinking of a pump and filter company, right? They sell very technical pumps and filtration systems into like food and pharmaceutical applications, right? They really want to get an engineer and put them through a 3-year onboarding program where they learn their systems and their way of doing things. They've had more success doing that than getting the 15-year veteran who may be bringing bad habits, who may be taking shortcuts. And, so every company is a little bit different, and I can make the argument for hiring them young right out of school. I tend to like to hire people I want to get them like on their second or third sales job. I don't necessarily like hiring them right out of school. I like, go get your first couple of years experience and then we'll bring you in. But it really depends on the company.
interesting. And it sounds like what that comes with, if it's not a simple decision, right? Because if you decide, hey, I'm not going to take the wily 20-year veteran that's sold my exact product for our major competition for all that time. If you're taking someone who is few years out of college, maybe, or second or third job, like you said, what it requires is some really good onboarding and training as well. And I don't know if that's one of your steps. We only got to step one,
Okay.
but I just think that it would sound like that would be an important part is that whole training and development piece.
So I won't bore you with all the steps, but basically get clarity on the position, and then you write the ad and you network to source people who fit that bill, and then you bring them on. We have a whole series of steps that we go through, including a few challenge interviews. One of the mistakes that I see talent teams making when they're bringing in salespeople, it's not like any other position. It's not like the office manager where you want to be warm and friendly. I don't want to be rude or unprofessional, but I want to put a sales candidate through a different pressure test that I really won't do it wouldn't be appropriate on other positions, right? So I want to test and measure them. How do they handle pressure? How do they handle quickly switching topics? Just like in a sales situation where the prospect jumps around, I'm going to jump around and put them under some pressure, end the meeting abruptly, see if they try and keep me on the phone. Those types of things work really well. And of course, we use a pre-employment assessment that measures the 21 core competencies that are must-haves for sales success. And that tells you what to interview around. That tells you what to do in terms of onboarding. It gives the leader some insight into how to coach and onboard this person. Anything I can do to shorten that time frame from, hire date to revenue production is going to give me an advantage. So those are all some of the things that really, when you implement a well-crafted sales hiring system, and when you're recruiting all the time, one of the things we tell our clients is don't ever stop recruiting. You can always find room for a really high producing salesperson, even if you're not actively looking, right? Always be in the market. And if every now and then you see a candidate who's stronger than your top performer, what a great situation to be in. What a great opportunity to kind of look at your team a little bit differently.
Love it. I want to stick within the hiring process, but I want to jump up a level from the salesperson to the sales leader.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
want to kind of run around in that space for a little bit. And let me actually start even higher than that. We'll get down there. So, a lot of the clients that I deal with, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are in situations where they're small enough that the CEO is the sales leader. That's
Usually.
very
Yeah.
often how it
Yeah.
starts out. I know in my business, I'm the
Yep.
sales leader. I probably always be the sales leader. What's that point? When should a CEO know, assuming you've got a company that is scaling, at what point should a CEO say, hey, maybe I need to bring a sales leader on board and it can't be just me anymore?
So if we're thinking of a startup, right, where the founder, CEO is the first salesperson, and then maybe they bring on a couple more, one or two more salespeople, and then they're that leader, the wheels are gonna start to fall off by the time they get to 3 or 4 salespeople. One of those first salespeople, you have to have an eye on, could this person eventually build a sales organization, right? And that's tricky because the person who can sell, especially in a startup environment, isn't always the same person who can lead. So I don't have a hard and fast rule like, hey, by your fourth hire, always do this. But I think the way to look at it is, when does the CEO's time and focus become of greater service by focusing on other parts of the business and not worrying about being the only rainmaker, being the person who has to manage the salespeople. Salespeople are difficult to manage, right? They're all going to the beat of their own drummer. We have to invest time coaching and developing them. We have to hold them accountable. And, I think once you get beyond the first initial couple hires, it's probably time to either bring in a fractional VP of sales or begin to look for a VP of sales. For a startup or for a small sales team, that VP of sales is going to have to carry a bag as well. They're going to have a number, they're going to have to sell and, and start to build up the team to the point where they have the luxury of just managing and coaching and not having to hit a number as well.
Yeah, and I imagine you, to your point of there's no hard and fast rule, your third hire or your fourth hire, but it would seem to me like you are, if the sales process begins to suffer because as the CEO, you're not spending enough time, or the sales process is fine, but other things start to suffer because as CEO, you're spending too much time selling. That's the time it may be beyond the point that you need to find
I
someone.
think I think it depends on the CEO. It depends on that, his or her strengths. Some CEOs are naturally good at sales and they maybe hang in there a little bit longer because they're good at it. Understanding that handing the reins over to a sales leader doesn't mean you'll never be involved. I think I would like to see every CEO occasionally involved in sales. CEOs can get meetings that no one else can get. I know I have a CEO who's very engineering, operationally minded, and they're a precision manufacturing company. And they were expecting to close a big deal and they didn't get it. And I coached the CEO on how to call the opposite CEO, much bigger company. This is my client's like $100 million manufacturer. They're calling $1 billion company, but he called the CEO and said, I'm just looking for feedback. And, what happened? And the client CEO didn't know, but God went to the right party. So he's referred down and had a really constructive dialogue on where they missed the mark. No one else in the company could have gotten that level of feedback. And so, it was very hard for the CEO. He was very uncomfortable. I had to hold him and kind of spoon feed him every step of the way, but he did it and he got tremendous insight. So, the CEO's attitude and how long they want to stay in sales is really going to depend on what their background and comfort level is. If you're an ops guy or a finance guy, you're going to look to hand that sales role off pretty quickly. In that case, I'm coaching them to stay involved, maybe longer beyond their comfort zone. For the person who's more of a sales and marketing person, they may hang in there a little longer, much to their detriment. They may be better off to go focus on something else and tighten up operations or whatever and not be in the middle of the sales process.
It's probably really hard, not probably because I've seen it and so have you. It's really hard to take that CEO who is very sales focused and in
Yes.
an entrepreneurial organization that happens a lot. It's hard for them to stay involved without micromanaging.
Right. Right. And they drive people nuts and high performers won't stick around. And yeah.
So it's now time to find a sales leader. I'm a CEO. It's time to find a sales leader. How do you talked a little bit about the process of hiring a salesperson? How is hiring a sales leader or is hiring a sales leader any different?
It is different. So all of the things that apply to hiring a salesperson, getting really clear on the role and the kind of, past experience that will transfer well. All that applies, right? Putting them under some pressure, leading them through a rigorous interview process and rigorous onboarding process. The skill sets I'm looking at are different. So I want to know, have they sold in this kind of environment? But I'm more interested in not, how you're hunting and consultative selling and qualifying skills. I may want to explore that a little bit, but more through the lens of, will you be able to coach to this? I'm more interested in looking at their ability to coach and develop people, their philosophy on coaching. How much time are you going to spend on coaching? Give me an example of a turnaround where you had somebody who wasn't performing and you helped them elevate their performance. How do you handle a high performer differently? It sounds counterintuitive, but your top producing salespeople actually want to be held accountable. They want to know someone's looking at them. It's really important that they get that attention. And yet, where do sales coaches spend their time? Sales managers spend their time always on the squeaky wheel, always on the person who's, not producing. If you take your top performer and get just a little bit more performance out of them, you're often going to get a higher return on that time than taking your bottom performer and improving them dramatically. So the interview process for a sales manager or a sales leader, my definition of a sales manager is you're managing salespeople, right? So I want to ask questions along how do you create a culture of accountability? How do you motivate and inspire your team? Give me a sense of what meeting rhythms have worked for you in the past. How do you learn and how do you adapt how you communicate based on your team's learning styles, right? So we spend a lot of time about, where do things fall apart in any management role, whether it's sales, bad communication, right? I can't tell you how many managers just expect everyone to think like they do, communicate like they do, process information like they do. So we spend a lot of time, how aware are they? What's their EQ? Are they able to adjust and adapt their style? What's a good coaching rhythm? Give me some good stories on coaching, accountability, and motivation. I may even ask some recruiting questions, but those types of questions. If I go up a level, so sales VP or CRO type role, that's someone who's developing managers, and then the managers are developing people. So, give me an example of someone you promoted from top salesperson to manager. Everyone has one. We've all made that mistake, right? So, when did you realize it was a mistake? How did you walk that back? Who has been successful in that transition? Give me that story, right? And there, I want to pivot my questioning a little bit more to how do you interact with other departments, right? So it's not just how are you developing these managers, but sometimes that CRO or that VP of sales is, smoothing things over with legal or marketing or operations or you name the department. All the friction points that sales organizations seem to find, right, and drive everyone else in the company nuts. You need a sales leader who's able to smooth that over, ameliorate any concerns, and be part of the leadership team first and advocate for their peers on that team, and then hold their managers accountable to make sure that the whole sales organization is actually supporting the company goals and objectives.
I love that last thing you said about being part of the leadership team because, I've seen many occasions where the sales leader is kind of running off and just blaming all the problems on every other leader. And, that before we're done, I may have another question on that because
Sure.
that's a tough one. But I want to go back before I forget. I want to come back around. You said something when you were talking about hiring salespeople. One of the reasons you said it's difficult is because they're salespeople, and if they're
Right.
worth anything as a salesperson, they can communicate pretty well.
Right.
So that I would imagine is 5x a problem when you're talking about a sales manager or a VP of sales at that level. So, how do you get around that? Is there is it just you just got to get really good at interviewing and figuring that stuff out? Or is there a tool or technique you've used at a sales leadership level to get beyond the BS that somebody may communicate, even if they can't really or are not prepared to take action in that way?
Well, we're a big fan of data, right? So we have a pre-employment assessment that we can use for inside sales, regular sales management, sales leadership. We even have a leadership assessment, right? So, we're a big fan of using those tools, which kind of gives you some insight into how the person thinks and how they're wired and where they are in terms of their evolution as a sales leader, right? It is a challenge interview, right? So I want to ask them some tough, timely questions. I want to put them under a little pressure. I want to challenge the success they brag about on their resume. For salespeople, you'd be amazed. They'll have all these claims, grew sales 75%. And you say, okay, so what was your average order value? Okay, now how many sales would you make in a typical month? And so over the 18 months you were there, what were your total sales before you got there? You break down the funnel and their numbers fall apart, right? And I'm like, that's not 75%. How'd you get 75%? They go, well, I don't know. That's just what my boss told me. I'm like, if you don't know your numbers, right? So knowing your numbers is part of it, challenging those claims they make. There's a bit of a challenge interview, but then near the end of the process, here's another thing. Good salespeople love to be sold. right? So when you get to the second or third interview, the tables turn a little bit. I've got to get them excited about the role, excited about where the company's going. I want to show them here's where we are, here's where we're going. And with someone like you in this seat, we can get there faster. You've got to get them enrolled in your vision, get them excited about it. And then as you're getting ready to present an offer, you have to qualify their decision process. They're measuring you, they're measuring your ability to close them, and so if you're kind of loosey goosey about it and you're not really setting the next meeting, you're not really setting expectations, you're not managing the process. If it's a cross country move, I'm going to ask questions like, how does your family feel about this? How old are your kids? You've got high schoolers. You're really going to move across the country? That like, how's that going to go over? Right. Or, oh, your kids are all launched. What does your spouse say about this? I'm sure he or she's going to be involved in this process. What's that decision process? How much time will you need? If I present an offer on a Wednesday, could we talk the following Monday, give you the end of the week and the weekend to hash it through with your spouse? They're watching how you qualify and close them. So it's a combination of things. I think it starts with the pre-employment assessment. We use that because it's so accurate and predictive, and it helps you interview better and it helps you laser focus your interview questions. But it also then helps with the onboarding. So that's part of it. It's also the challenge interviews, and then it's the selling them on the vision and the potential, getting them enrolled in your company vision and getting them excited about it, and kind of handling the close efficiently and effectively.
Love it. Now you've got them on board.
Yes.
How do you, and this sounds like a blindingly simple question,
Right.
and maybe it is, but in case there's some nuance there, how do you measure the success of a sales leader? Now, of course,
Yep.
the easy answer, the blindingly simple answer is it's revenue.
Yeah.
And of course it is. What else should you be looking at when you, I guess it starts when you're figuring out what you want. You ought to be figuring out
Right.
what success looks like. But
Right.
after you bring them on board, how do you measure the success of a sales leader?
So for a sales leader, and I'm going to come at this from a couple points of view, right? So for when I'm coaching a sales leader, I'll talk about how the quality of their coaching and leadership is measured by, are the problems your team's bringing to you improving over time, right? That's the feedback loop. Revenue, obviously, average order value, obviously, gross profit, obviously. But are we getting further in the process on our own before we have to escalate to a sales leader? Are we asking better questions? Are we bringing different challenges? I love it when a salesperson or a sales manager comes to me with a new problem because they're at a point in the conversation they haven't been before, because they did something I told them to do a couple weeks ago. And now they're like, okay, I did that. Now what? Right. If you're getting the same problems again and again, a couple things. One, you should probably look at your team and do you have the right people? And maybe look in the mirror and say, okay, am I giving them effective coaching? Because obviously it's not making a difference. So, from the perspective of the leader, to me, there's other measurements like overall retention and, revenue trajectory and all shorter sales cycle, all of that kind of stuff. But to me, the ultimate measure is the quality of the problems my team is bringing to me improving over time? And if not, why not? Right. Now, if I look at it from a different point of view, when I look at it from the overall leadership team, then, what I'm looking for my sales leader is consistency, forecast accuracy, right? I need to know that there's a structured process behind the numbers they're sharing. If I'm operations and the sales manager is saying, hey, we're going to hit this big order in May, and then April 25th, May becomes June. What do you mean? I just hired some people. I just adjusted some work. I put this off so I'd have capacity for May. Why did that shift? Why did that shift last minute? So that kind of clarity and accuracy of forecasting and predictability, having a rigorous system behind there so that it is about revenue growth, obviously. It's also about employee engagement and retention. And, all those things matter a lot. But what I think what's even more important is that accuracy of forecasting, accuracy and being able to, if we miss a number, we have to know why. And we have to be able to communicate exactly what happened. And communicating that earlier rather than later is key. So those are how, so looking at it from the leader's perspective, but also from the leadership team's perspective.
I want to go back to the forecast accuracy piece because you had use that as an example of where someone on the operations side may say, "What the heck? You said that order was
Right.
coming in April. I hired for it." So that gives me my excuse to come back around
Go for it.
to something you talked about earlier, which is the relationship of the sales leader to the other members of the leadership team. And I'm sure we've both seen both good and very bad examples
Yeah.
of that. So help me understand what what should we be looking for a good sales leader to do? Again, we're not interviewing now, now part of the leadership team.
Yes.
How should a good sales leader make sure they're building strong relationships with, it's always sales versus service or sales versus operations or sales versus marketing. I'd sell a lot better if you put more marketing, better marketing qualified leads in front of me.
Yeah.
Sales seems to be at the middle of a lot of those,
Yes, they
that
are.
pushing and shoving. So how, I guess from two perspectives, maybe as a great sales leader, how should a great sales leader think about building those relationships? And then secondly is as a CEO,
Mm.
how should a CEO be helping to smooth those relationships and build those relationships?
Okay, so it's amazing to me how often in my B2B sales consulting practice, I find myself in the middle of ridiculous conversations, mediating disputes between sales and fill in the blank. Sales and legal, sales and marketing, sales and finance, sales and, operations, right? And I always start with sitting down with the salespeople and the sales leader and say, you guys are in sales. You're supposed to be the smooth talking, silver tongued, like, why are you fighting with marketing? Why are you fighting with operate? Like, how can you, if you treated your ops person as if they were a customer, you would never send that email. You would never talk to them that way, right? You would never fly off the handle like that. Number one, I think the leader has to have that lead by example mindset and set the stage for their internal customers, and we're going to treat them as such. I think they need to really work to build that leader to leader relationship. Again, first team is the leadership team. So I'm going to talk to the COO. I'm going to talk to the chief marketing officer. I'm going to talk to the chief finance officer. I'm going to make sure that I'm square with legal and make sure that leader to leader we're good. And I'm going to really set the standard and set the expectation with my team. Look, we're not going to talk to them that way. No one here is trying to frustrate you. Everybody's acting with the right intentions. There are ridiculous barriers that departments throw in the way of sales. I mean, there absolutely are. And rather than the smart salesperson blowing up, the contract review person who's probably making 40K a year and not very well paid, just kind of checking all the boxes. Like rather than blowing that person up, escalate it to me and I'll bring it down the other way. We'll work to make the system better, give them meaningful feedback. That's the mindset I want the leader to have. Now, from a CEO perspective, the CEO has to stay in contact with everyone on the leadership team and make sure that she's got her finger on, hey, where's the friction point? And, that means there's probably always an eye on sales, like, okay, who's sales fighting with now? And making sure that they're supporting that sales leader in their efforts to get along with all the other departments and helping the other departments recognize, hey, nothing happens until we sell something, right? As frustrating as it can be, as maddening as it can be to deal with late expense reports and incomplete details, but I need a contract by tomorrow or whatever, they're trying to make things happen and they're doing a job that no one else is doing. So let's appreciate that and let's work together, right? So that's, again, I don't know if I have a hard and fast rule, but it really is communication and keeping your finger on the pulse of, hey, how's everyone getting along? Where are these problems? Let's surface those problems and not let them fester. And let's make sure our leaders are aligned. And then each team has to kind of hold their team accountable for behaving appropriately, not blowing people up for no good reason.
What I love about what you just said, and part of the reason I love it is because I haven't thought about it this way. And I think it's really powerful is there are two things that you said that I think if we put together, it's a wonderful formula. One is that sales leader. I love the idea of that sales leader treating the other functions around them as internal customers
Right.
and
Yeah.
making sure their people feel the same way. Now, that works really well if at the same time the CEO does the second thing you mentioned. If the CEO not only has his or her fingers on the pulse of what's going on, but if that CEO is to some degree reinforcing the importance of the sales function, because it's too easy for operations and service and legal and
Right.
everybody else to jump on them. If the CEO is doing what they can to support the sales function, reinforce the idea that nothing happens until we sell something. I think if you take those two things together,
Right.
because if the CEO isn't that supportive, it's going to become really hard for the sales leader to have that internal customer attitude. But if they know the CEO has their back,
Right.
then they could afford to have that attitude. So I love putting those two things together. Beautiful.
Everybody wants to be successful. Marketing wants to generate more leads. That's how they get gratification. And operations wants to deliver products on time, ahead of schedule, at a good margin. They want to produce things without errors, right? Everyone's acting with the best intentions, and yet, people get frustrated because they perceive, well, sales is just out golfing all the time, or they're always traveling, or their expenses are always late, or whatever. And they have to recognize that sales is facing adversity that no one else in the company is facing. They have people lying to them. They have people, trying to throw them off their game. Their competition's tearing them down. They're lonely. They're out on their own on the road trying to make things happen. All of these things. They get back to the office, and everyone in the office has a nice, safe, predictable environment. Sales isn't safe or predictable.
No, and what sales also has, which as a coach I love, but it makes it harder on salespeople, is as a coach, I'm always trying to help my clients quantify what success means for
Right.
finance, for marketing,
Right.
for operations. For sales, it's incredibly easy to look at numbers and see how they're doing, which is wonderful in terms of holding them accountable. But man, it puts a lot of pressure on salespeople that everybody sees. If an accounts payable clerk is missing an invoice and finds it later, that doesn't go as high up as the leadership team finding that out. But if the salesperson screws up and doesn't close a big deal, man, you can bet
Boy,
everybody
everybody
knows about
hears.
it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, I mean, obviously, revenue and maybe margin are the two obvious metrics that we measure a sales team by. I think getting some leading indicators, revenue is a lagging indicator, right? So I know companies who are enjoying great success or they go on a nice run, and you ask and say, well, how'd you do it? What'd you do? And they can't tell you. Like, the only thing worse than hitting your numbers is hitting your numbers and not knowing how you did it, and therefore you don't know how to repeat it and what to do next time, which goes back
Absolutely.
to the forecasting accuracy and some of the stuff we talked about earlier. So, to me, I wanna measure the incremental steps along the way that contribute to that sales success. So are we having the right number of conversations? Are we having conversations with the right people? Are we expanding our existing core customers? Or kind of depends on what you're selling, obviously, right? Some clients are more transactional, some are like land and expand or whatever, right? So it depends on the market you're in and all of that. But what are we measuring early in the sales process that can help contribute to our success rather than just kind of looking in the rearview mirror saying, hey, we hit our numbers last quarter. Hope we hit them this quarter too.
So you've been doing this sales coaching thing for a long time,
Yes.
but last year you decided to write a book. It's called The Sales Team You Deserve. Why did you feel like there was a need for that book?
Great question. Thanks for asking. So, I didn't think the world needed another how to sell book, right? There's some great books. We use baseline selling, there's spin selling, there's the challengers there. There's a lot of the mechanics and the sales methodology books out there. Where I see CEOs struggle is there's a frustration they have. And I hear it time and time. I've observed this pattern over the last 20 years that I've been in business, right? The CEO who's really happy with their operations and really happy with their marketing, and maybe they could improve things a little bit, but they're generally like they understand it and they're happy. And I see them settling when it comes to sales. They can't quite put their finger on it, but they know they're frustrated, and they almost measure the sales department by a different standard, right? So what I've tried to do with the sales team you deserve is outline what we see as the roadmap to get to the sales team you deserve. It starts with recognition as an owner or a CEO What are your blind spots, right? Where you stand depends on where you sit. If you've got an operations perspective, that's going to influence how you view sales. If you have a marketing perspective, you're going to look at features and benefits and how do we get something bright and shiny, and let's just put that out in the market and sales will follow. If you're a legal, you're a lawyer who became CEO, you're going to tend to look at things from a risk mitigation perspective. Sometimes if you've got a sales perspective, but you've become CEO, your sales instincts are 15 years old, and maybe what worked 15 years ago doesn't work now. So that creates a different kind of blind spot. But first thing is a CEO recognizing this is where I potentially have a blind spot, and this is what I need to do to adjust it. Right. Then, we basically outline our typical transformation program. So, let's get good sales leadership in place. Let's get good sales coaching practices in place. Let's hire what we spent a bit of time talking about today. Let's make sure we're hiring and consistently upgrading our team. Let's make sure we're compensating them appropriately. Let's make sure that we have a good sales methodology in place. Let's make sure there's a lot of buzz around sales enablement. There's new positions where you have like chief enablement officer or whatever. You have all these positions. People spend gobs and gobs of money on new tools, new CRMs, new shiny objects. And yet at the end of the day, if it's not driving more revenue, it's a waste of time and money. And everyone thinks, well, that next investment is going to make all the difference. Well, no. Are you leveraging everything you're doing now? Right. So I think, if the filter is, what am I doing to help make the salesperson's job easier and make them more effective so they have more time doing what's hard, which is face to face conversations, and less time entering stuff into a CRM with 85 fields to get to the next step, right? That's kind of the perspective you have to have. So the book is basically outlining what are the steps an owner or CEO needs to take to really have their sales organization operating at the same level as everyone else and get the sales team they deserve.
Love it. And I think it's a book that is needed in a big way because there's so much good stuff out there about sales process. I don't think anybody's lacking there, but it's that bigger picture
Right.
that is missing. So that's great. So as we wrap up, tell us you've mentioned some of them, but what are some of the ways you typically help clients?
So there's a couple things that we do. A typical engagement for us is with a middle market, kind of lower to mid market. I'd say companies 20 million to 200 million in annual revenue, B2B. The more complexity in their sales process. I love a really long sales cycle with multi-party buying situation. Those highly engineered, highly technical sales, we have an opportunity to have a bigger impact. We certainly have clients that sell more transaction. That's fine too. But that's our typical client, and we'll implement an entire system, right? So it starts with data. We start by evaluating and understanding the existing sales team. What are the strengths we can build on, and where are there opportunities for improvement? Most sales managers do not spend enough time coaching. So we spend a lot of time early on in a program helping managers understand what a good coaching conversation sounds like. What are some of the habits they need to form, just in terms of organizing their schedule. Every manager I talk to says, oh, I coach all the time. And what they mean by that is they walk around the hall and say, what's closing? How can I help? Instead of coaching for development and say, okay, hey, the number one thing I want you to work on as a sales professional is fill in the blank, right? And you stick with a theme over time rather than kind of got a minute spot coaching and, let me go in and close a deal for you, which ultimately is just going to frustrate salespeople, right? So we'll spend time with sales leaders. Meanwhile, we'll work with salespeople. We have a bunch of different programming on, I mentioned the sales evaluation that we do that measures 21 core competencies. Think of those as a collection of beliefs that can hinder your ability to execute a tactic. It's not enough to just intellectually know this is how you prospect. This is how you ask questions to consultatively sell. This is how you qualify. People understand that. They can improve, right? There is a certain benefit to going through and tightening up the process around those steps. But what's more important is understanding what are the self-limiting beliefs that prevent you from asking the question you need to ask. And
By the way,
yeah,
I took this assessment,
yes,
probably 10 or 11 years ago. And I remember getting the results, and my first reaction was, oh, that's not true. This thing isn't accurate. And then, Mike, you and I sat down and debriefed it, and
yeah.
it was really accurate and really helpful.
It's scary accurate and it's hard to read. right? I mean, I've taken it as well, and it's kind of like, wait a second, this says I only have 10% closing capability. What the heck does that mean? But it's measuring salespeople against a very high standard, which is what we want to do. It's okay. Nobody's perfect. How do we get you there? Where are your opportunities for growth? What are the strengths we can build on, and where can we help you improve? And we have learning tracks and online resources that help salespeople kind of study on their own, reflections that go back to the manager so the manager can integrate that into their coaching. So, it's a whole program where we'll help the manager elevate their coaching. We help the individual sales producers get better. Then we implement a sales process, and we do this over the course. Typical engagement for us, Mike, is 4 to 8 quarters. So 1 to 2 years. And we have clients that have kept us around beyond that, but typically that transformation process, if you call it 6 quarters, that's a pretty good standard for trying to move the organization in a positive direction. The companies we work with typically double or more in sales, right? So we've got that track record. I've got loads of examples of companies that went from,
I'm not sure anybody would be interested in that,
yeah,
Mike.
probably
No
not.
one, I
Probably
don't
not.
know.
And so that's our typical program. We have a couple of clients. One of the areas we're focusing on is we've got some of these really big companies, like more than 200 million, that are hiring lots of salespeople. We found a nice little niche with a lot of software companies or anyone who's hiring like BDRs, and they're hiring 15, 20, 30 salespeople a year, just implementing our sales hiring piece and even helping using some of our online tools for onboarding. That's been an area of focus for us. And then we've also recently launched, it's funny, we started out knowing each other through the coaching organization. A lot of the folks, and you've been kind enough to introduce me to many of your clients, but a lot of the coaches that are in my network work with companies that are below that 20 million mark and really can't afford the full program like a $50 million company could. So we've recently launched what we're calling intelligent sales growth, which is taking everything we do with our core clients, those middle market clients, and we're distilling it down to a combination of online resources and group coaching. So we can come in and make it a little bit more approachable for, that $10 million company with just a handful of salespeople that really doesn't need as much time, energy, and attention and one-to-one stuff from me or somebody on my team. So
And then all they need to do is double their sales a couple of times and
then they can pay
become a
the high
client.
rent.
Yeah, then
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a self-serving
I can,
goal here.
you're
Yeah,
out for yourself. Oh my God.
100%. As long as we're clear about that, right?
Love it. No, that's awesome. So, Mike, if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
So our website's intelligentconversations.com, right? So just that's probably the best place. We have a LinkedIn page as well. I'm on LinkedIn. Anyone who wants to connect, just say, "Hey, I heard your podcast with Mike Goldman. I'll connect with you." So that's another good thing. But yeah, those are probably the two best ways. Intelligentconversations.com, or, look me up on LinkedIn, look up Intelligent Conversations on LinkedIn, and either way will get to me.
And the book, don't forget the book, the
Oh, the book.
book.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, coach. Thank you, coach. Yeah. The sales team you deserve, right? So available on Amazon or at a bookstore near you, right? So yeah, and it's funny because we did a promo where this is a little embarrassing story, but we did a promo where we did a 99-cent Kindle version. And for the life of me, I can't figure out how to change it back. So go buy the Kindle version before I figure out how to change my
Oops.
promotion, right?
Lucky you're independently wealthy and you're not looking to make a lot of money on the book.
I'm not going to make a lot of money on the book sale. I'm not worried about
Get
that.
it now. Get it now. Mike, this was great. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Mike. It's always a pleasure.